The oldest warning sign, how history links the death of comedy to the death of democracy. A Berlin's munition worker was executed in 1944 when she was overheard telling this joke. Quote, Hitler and Goering are standing on top of the Berlin radio tower. Hitler says he wants to cheer up the German people. Goering says, why don't you just jump? She was executed for telling that joke. Another whispered joke was, Goering has attached an arrow to the row of medals in his tunic. It reads, continue on the back. Continued on the back. Jews shared jokes as they were about to be persecuted by the Nazis. For example, quote, 2 Jews are about to be shot. Suddenly the order comes to hang them from outside instead. One says to the other, you see, they're running out of bullets. Whisper jokes happen in other dictatorships, too. After Putin took power in Russia, he banned a puppet show that made fun of him, and he banned comedians that make fun of him. And here's an example. Stalin appears to Putin in a dream and says, I have 2 bits of advice for you. Kill off all your opponents and paint the Kremlin blue. Putin asks, why blue? Stalin responds, I knew you wouldn't object to the first one. This, by the way, that's a hat tip to Mark Jacob, who included all those things in his Substack newsletter. But, my op-ed today at the very top of the page starts out, we've seen this movie before. It's got this picture of, from the X account of the Department of Labor, by the way, of one of these giant banners. They're hanging now from 3 different federal buildings, these giant banners with Trump's face. I think it might be his mugshot, from when he was arrested in Georgia. It's just, this kind of angry, I am the dictator and you will be afraid. So anyhow, as I said, we've seen this movie before, at least our grandparents did. Dictators can't take a joke. I mean, that's really the bottom line. Dictators can't take a joke. They're humorless because they know that humor is one of the things that can bring down dictatorships. It's one of the ways that the bubble of invincibility gets punctured. So on February 4th, 1939, 7 months before the invasion of Poland, which kicked off World War II, the man with oversight responsibility for all German media, Goebbels, officially forbade 5 German comedians who at that time had been performing in Berlin from ever again performing in public. The headline in the New York Times on February 4th, 1939, quote, Goebbels ends careers of 5 Aryan actors who made witticisms about the Nazi regime. And their crime, according to Goebbels, was publicly telling, quote, brazen, impertinent, arrogant, and tactless jokes about der Führer. This is a quote from the New York Times. Their humor, Goebbels told the press, only appealed to, and then they quote Goebbels, society rabble that followed them with thundering applause, parasitic scum inhabiting our luxury streets that seemed to have only the task of proving how little brains people can get along and even acquire money and prominence, end of quote. The Times added that Goebbels and Hitler were particularly incensed that they had been caricatured, right? And more, even worse than that, these 5 comedians were all accused of making fun of Hitler's followers. You got that? This is like, making fun of Hitler's followers. Quote, what amused the public most, however, and presumably roiled the National Socialist authorities, this is from the New York Times, although Dr. Goebbels does not mention it, is that they deftly but unmistakably caricatured some gestures, poses, and physical characteristics of National Socialist leaders, sometimes with bon mots that made the rounds of the country. The Times noted that the Nazis were furious. They said that, quote, we have a keen sense of humor that could kill opponents with ridicule, end quote. And then the Times added, but as National Socialism proposes to remain in power 2,000 years, it has neither the time nor the patience to apply that method to the, quote, miserable literati. So now here we have the Federal Censorship Commission, the FCC, Chairman Brendan Carr, seeming to follow in Goebbels' footsteps. I mean, he has implicitly threatened that, he's going after newscasts, after Disney and ABC and all this stuff. I mean, this is really dangerous stuff. This is how democracies die. There's just, no other way to say it. This is how democracies die. And in a really terrible, terrible way as well. So this is the oldest warning, I think, frankly, in history. Trump himself was blunt about how illegal it is for people on television to criticize him. And he wasn't just talking about comedians, specifically calling out newscasts that will presumably be Carr's next target. So, where do we go with this? Well, he's got these giant banners, these, hanging from federal buildings in Washington, D.C. And Democratic Congressman Hank Johnson said, "When I saw the banners hanging from federal office buildings last week, it reminded me of the Communist Party in China and the banners hanging from federal offices, just totally inappropriate and a step toward authoritarianism. It's another indication of the march that we're on towards authoritarianism in this country." So here's the question. This week, is anybody going to be willing to tell to quote Goebbels, brazen, impertinent, arrogant, and tactless jokes about these Saddam Hussein-like banners that Trump is erecting with his picture all over Washington, D.C.? Stay tuned. Because dictators, I'm guessing that comedians are going to leave them alone. Because dictators can't take a joke, We'll be right back.